Europe in early 1914 was a paradox, a continent brimming with innovation and progress, yet teetering on the brink of self-destruction. It was a time of unprecedented advancements, but also of deeply entrenched animosities. Modern cities pulsed with life, showcasing architectural marvels and the latest technologies. New inventions promised a brighter future, and booming industry fueled economic growth across the continent. Factories churned out goods at an astonishing rate, transforming the lives of ordinary people. Yet beneath this veneer of progress, old rivalries simmered, threatening to boil over at any moment. Decades of mistrust and competition between nations had created a volatile atmosphere where diplomatic tensions ran high. The British Empire, with its vast colonial holdings, jealously guarded its naval dominance, ensuring its control over the seas and global trade routes. The Royal Navy was the envy of the world, a symbol of Britain's power and prestige. Meanwhile, Germany, ambitious and newly unified under Kaiser Wilhelm II, sought its own place in the sun, challenging the established order and demanding recognition as a major world power. This ambition fueled a rapid military build-up and a desire for colonial expansion. France, still bitter from its humiliating defeat by Germany in the Franco-Prussian War, longed for revenge and the recovery of its lost territories. The desire for revanche permeated French society, influencing its foreign policy and military strategy. These simmering tensions fueled a relentless arms race, a dangerous competition to build bigger and better weapons, bigger armies, more powerful warships, and detailed war plans ready to go, outlining strategies for swift and decisive victories. Alliances formed the Triple Entente: France, Russia, Britain, and the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy. These alliances were meant to keep peace, to create a balance of power that would deter aggression, but instead created a rigid system, a complex web of commitments that tied nations together, where a small spark in some distant corner of the continent could ignite a continent-wide war, dragging all the major powers into a devastating conflict. Europe was a powder keg, with nations locked in suspicion, each convinced of the other's hostile intentions, and ready for conflict at the slightest provocation, poised to unleash their military might upon one another. The sense of progress masked a deep instability, a fragile peace built on a foundation of fear and mistrust. The stage was set for disaster, even as most people believed peace would last, clinging to the hope that diplomacy and reason would prevail. Beneath the optimism, Europe was closer to catastrophe than anyone realized, a catastrophe that would soon engulf the world in unprecedented bloodshed. The spark that ignited the tinderbox of European tensions came on June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo, a city simmering with political unrest. This seemingly isolated event would soon engulf the entire continent and eventually the world in a conflict unlike any seen before. It was there, amidst the bustling streets and shadowed corners, that Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his beloved wife Sophie met their tragic end, assassinated in broad daylight. The perpetrators were a group of young Bosnian Serb nationalists, fueled by fervent dreams of independence and liberation from Austro-Hungarian rule. They were idealists, willing to sacrifice everything for their cause. They saw the Archduke's visit as a deliberate provocation, a symbol of oppression and foreign domination on what they considered their rightful land. Their aim was to strike a blow against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, to shatter its authority and ignite a rebellion that would liberate their people. The assassination plot began with a failed bomb attempt earlier in the day, a clumsy act that could have easily foiled the entire plan. But fate intervened, and a fateful wrong turn brought the Archduke's car, carrying him and his wife directly into the path of destiny. There, standing on a street corner, was Gavrilo Princip, one of the young assassins ready to seize his moment in history. With unwavering resolve, he seized the moment and fired 2 fatal shots, forever altering the course of the 20th century. The news of the deaths sent shockwaves across Europe, a continent already teetering on the brink of war. Diplomats and political leaders scrambled to contain the fallout, hoping against hope that the crisis could be resolved through negotiation and compromise, that it would remain a local affair. But for Austria-Hungary, this was far more than a simple act of murder. It was a direct attack on the very honor and integrity of the empire, demanding a swift and decisive response, a show of strength to deter future challenges. The assassination in Sarajevo was the trigger that set everything in motion. But the true danger lay not in the act itself, but in the complex web of alliances and rivalries that governed the relationships between the great powers of Europe, and in how they would react to this pivotal moment. The world watched with bated breath, completely unaware that this single tragic act would soon unleash a global catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. The powder keg of European tensions had finally been lit, and the fuse was burning rapidly. Europe's fate, and indeed the fate of the world, now hung precariously in the balance, teetering on the edge of an abyss. The assassination set off a chain reaction, the July crisis, of ultimatums and mobilizations. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany's blank check, issued Serbia an ultimatum designed to be rejected. Serbia accepted most demands but refused to surrender its sovereignty. Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914. Russia mobilized to defend Serbia. Germany declared war on Russia, then France. Germany's plan required invading neutral Belgium, prompting Britain to declare war. In just days, alliances turned a local dispute into a continent-wide conflict. The machinery of war was unstoppable, diplomacy failed, and Europe plunged into chaos. The world's most powerful nations were now at war. The fuse had burned down, the explosion was inevitable, the Great War had begun. War declarations sparked celebrations in Europe's capitals. Crowds cheered, flags waved, and young men rushed to enlist. Many saw war as a grand adventure, expecting it to be over by Christmas. Nationalist propaganda fueled excitement and a sense of duty. But beneath the surface, families said tearful goodbyes, and older generations feared what was coming. The reality of modern warfare, machine guns, artillery, mass armies, was far more terrifying than anyone imagined. As soldiers traveled to the front, excitement gave way to anxiety. The first wounded returned and grim stories spread. The adventure faded, replaced by dread and uncertainty. Europe braced for a war unlike any before. The assassination in Sarajevo acted as the spark, igniting a powder keg of European tensions. The war, initially confined to a localized conflict, spread rapidly, engulfing nation after nation in its fiery embrace. It quickly escalated, becoming a global conflict as empires, driven by ambition, alliances, and a thirst for power, joined the fight. The world watched as long-standing treaties and agreements dragged countries from every corner of the globe into the fray. Battles raged not just in Europe, the heart of the conflict, but across Africa, where colonial powers clashed over territories and resources. Asia, witnessing the siege of colonial holdings and the rise of new power dynamics, and the world's oceans, where naval battles determined the flow of supplies and the control of vital sea lanes. The British Empire, in its vast reach, called on its colonies, bringing millions more into the war, soldiers from distant lands fighting for a cause that often felt far removed from their own. On the Western Front, the primary theatre of conflict, Germany's initial, rapid advance, aimed at a swift victory, was halted at the crucial Battle of the Marne. Both sides, realizing the futility of open warfare, dug trenches, creating a static, brutal front characterized by unimaginable horrors and relentless stalemates. That would last years, trapping soldiers in a living hell of mud, barbed wire, and constant bombardment. The war of movement, with its grand strategies and sweeping advances, effectively ended. A war of attrition began, a grinding struggle where victory would be determined by who could endure the greatest losses. On the Eastern Front, a vast expanse stretching across Eastern Europe, battles were larger and more fluid, characterized by sweeping maneuvers and cavalry charges, but just as deadly, claiming countless lives in its relentless advance and retreat. Germany won early victories, inflicting heavy losses on the Russian army, but Russia's vast manpower, seemingly inexhaustible, kept the front alive, preventing a decisive German victory. The two-front war, stretching Germany's military and industrial capacity to its limit, drained Germany's resources and ensured a long, grinding conflict, a war of attrition that would test the will of nations. What began as a Balkan crisis, a localized dispute in a volatile region, had become a world war, a global catastrophe that would reshape the map of Europe and the course of history. The scale of destruction, both in terms of human lives and material resources, was unprecedented, leaving a scar on the world that would last for generations. The war changed life far beyond the battlefield, touching every corner of society. With men at the front, women filled roles in factories, transport, and offices, gaining new independence and opportunities. Governments took control of economies, rationed goods and censored information. Total war had arrived, demanding complete societal commitment. Propaganda unified nations, but also fueled hatred and intolerance. Daily life was marked by anxiety. Every telegram could bring news of loss. Communities were bound by shared sacrifice, but the shadow of war touched everyone. The home front became a second battlefield. The war's impact would last long after the fighting stopped. Society was transformed, fundamentally and irrevocably, and old certainties vanished. The world would never be the same. 1914 was not just the start of a war, it was the end of an era and the violent birth of a new world. The hope for quick victory died in the trenches. The war became a grim struggle of attrition. 4 empires collapsed and revolutions reshaped nations. The Russian Revolution and the fall of the Ottoman Empire redrew the world map, sowing seeds for future conflicts. Total war changed the relationship between people and their governments forever. The immense human cost created a lost generation and deep disillusionment. Old beliefs in progress and reason were shattered. 1914 marked a turning point. Imperialism, nationalism, and militarism exploded into global catastrophe. The war set the stage for the even greater upheavals of the 20th century. Understanding 1914 is essential to understanding our world today.
The Great War was initially predicted to be a swift affair, over before the festive season. It was supposed to be over by Christmas of 1914, but as 1915 dawned, that optimistic hope was utterly gone, replaced by a grim, seemingly endless and muddy stalemate that stretched across the continent. The Western Front had solidified into a vast, intricate line of trenches, a scar across the landscape. This extended, unbroken line stretched relentlessly from the neutral Swiss Alps all the way to the shores of the North Sea. Millions of men now faced each other across the desolate expanse of no man's land, a deadly zone of barbed wire and shell craters, trapped in a grinding war of attrition, where victory seemed to depend solely on which side could endure the most losses. 1915 became a year of brutal lessons, a harsh education in the realities of modern warfare. It was also a year of desperate attempts to break the deadlock, to find some way to overcome the seemingly impenetrable defenses. Military leaders, far from the front lines, feverishly tried new strategies, often with little understanding of the conditions their men faced. These strategies led to infamous campaigns, remembered for their staggering losses and minimal gains. It also ushered in terrible innovations in killing, as both sides sought any advantage, no matter how inhumane. The war's true, horrifying character fully emerged, a glimpse into the abyss of industrialized slaughter. It was a conflict unlike any before, a new kind of war defined by its scale and its mechanized brutality. Old tactics developed for a different era failed disastrously against the relentless fire of machine guns and the devastating power of modern artillery, which could obliterate entire units in moments. This new reality was forcing armies to adapt their strategies and equipment or perish in the face of overwhelming firepower. Despite the staggering losses, both sides continued to launch massive offensives, throwing men against fortified positions, still stubbornly convinced that a breakthrough, a decisive victory, was somehow still possible, just beyond the next barrage. Britain's new volunteers, eager and inspired by patriotic fervor and the call to duty, would soon be thrust into the nightmarish reality of industrialized warfare, a world far removed from their romantic ideals. On the Western Front, Germany sought to bleed France dry, to exhaust its manpower and resources through relentless attacks. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, Russia's vast but troubled army, plagued by shortages and internal strife, braced for further disaster. As the year wore on, 1915's battles became synonymous with feudal slaughter, names etched in history as symbols of pointless sacrifice. This was undeniably a turning point, a critical juncture in the conflict. The war became total, demanding the full mobilization of entire nations, their economies, and their populations. It was fought not just on the bloody battlefields of Europe, but also in the humming factories churning out weapons and supplies, in the fields and farms struggling to feed the war machine, and even in the minds of civilians bombarded with propaganda and struggling to maintain morale on the home front. The grim events of this year irrevocably set the stage for even greater horrors and unimaginable destruction to come. The world's great powers slowly realized they were trapped, ensnared in a conflict with no easy way out. It was becoming increasingly clear that this was a conflict that would fundamentally define the century, reshaping the world order. The naive dream of a quick and glorious war was definitively dead, shattered by the realities of the trenches. Only grim endurance, a steely determination to survive, remained for those caught in its relentless grip. In early 1915, as the Great War raged across Europe, Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, championed a daring plan, a strategic gamble that he believed could alter the course of the war. It was a plan to attack the Ottoman Empire, a key ally of Germany. The primary objective was to break the agonizing stalemate on the Western Front. The core of the plan was to force a fleet of warships through the narrow and heavily defended Dardanelles Strait, and then to bombard Constantinople, the Ottoman capital, into submission. Success would also open a vital supply route to Russia, which was struggling against the Central Powers. On paper, the strategy seemed brilliant, a swift shortcut to a decisive victory in the East. In March of 1915, a massive Allied naval fleet launched its attack, but the Allied ships encountered a deadly gauntlet of Ottoman naval mines and devastating artillery fire from the shore batteries. The initial naval assault was a complete and utter failure. Undeterred by the naval defeat, the Allies pressed on, landing troops at Gallipoli in April. British, French, and Anzac forces stormed the beaches under heavy fire, but the landings quickly descended into chaos, and fierce Ottoman resistance brought their advance to a grinding halt. The Gallipoli campaign soon devolved into brutal trench warfare, mirroring the horrors of the Western Front. Soldiers on both sides endured appalling conditions, battling heat, disease, and relentless close-quarters fighting. Amidst the carnage, Private John Simpson Kirkpatrick, an ambulance stretcher-bearer, became a legend, tirelessly rescuing wounded men from the battlefield with the aid of his trusty donkey. He became a powerful symbol of Anzac courage and compassion. But even extraordinary courage couldn't overcome the strategic and tactical disasters that plagued the campaign. By the end of the year, the Allies were forced to concede defeat and evacuated Gallipoli, leaving behind a staggering 250,000 casualties on both sides. The Gallipoli gamble had failed utterly, becoming a costly and tragic blunder. The disastrous campaign's failure haunted Winston Churchill for years to come, and it became a potent symbol of strategic miscalculation and tragic loss of life. The initial dream of achieving a quick victory by striking a blow against the Ottoman Empire was completely shattered. Gallipoli became a somber byword for heroic sacrifice in the face of feudal loss, forever etched in the annals of military history. While the brutal fighting at Gallipoli raged on relentlessly, claiming countless lives, a new and even more insidious horror emerged on the Western Front, forever altering the landscape of warfare. In April 1915, near the Belgian city of Ypres, the Germans unleashed a terrifying new weapon, poison gas, irrevocably changing the nature of warfare and ushering in an era of chemical combat. French and Algerian troops, stationed in the forward trenches, watched in disbelief as a strange, ominous yellow-green cloud drifted slowly toward them across the battlefield. Chlorine gas, a deadly chemical agent. The gas mercilessly suffocated men, burning their lungs and causing agonizing deaths, creating widespread panic and chaos among the Allied ranks, and opening up a staggering 4-mile gap in the previously impenetrable Allied line. For a brief moment, a decisive breakthrough seemed entirely possible, but German hesitation in exploiting the advantage, coupled with a critical lack of available reserves, ultimately stalled the German advance. The 1st Canadian Division, displaying remarkable courage, rushed into the breach, bravely holding the line under repeated and devastating gas attacks, armed with only hastily improvised damp cloths for minimal protection. The Second Battle of Ypres quickly devolved into a brutal and protracted test of endurance and resilience. The Canadians suffered exceptionally heavy losses during the fighting, but ultimately prevented a complete German breakthrough of the Allied lines. The relentless battle left the city of Ypres significantly smaller, more ruined, and infinitely more dangerous, with a staggering toll of over 100,000 casualties on both sides. Most importantly, the Second Battle of Ypres marked the point where chemical warfare was no longer a theoretical possibility, but a grim and terrifying reality of modern conflict. Gas masks quickly became standard issue for all soldiers on the Western Front, a constant and unsettling reminder of the ever-present threat of invisible death. The psychological terror of gas warfare haunted the dreams and waking hours of every soldier who experienced it. The already unimaginable brutality of the war had undeniably reached a horrifying new level. Ypres chillingly proved that innovation in the methods of killing would come to define the character of the entire conflict. The battlefield had become a grotesque laboratory for testing the limits of human cruelty and technological horror. The established rules of war, if they ever truly existed, had been irrevocably changed forever. Unlike the static West, the Eastern Front in 1915 saw sweeping advances and catastrophic retreats. The Central Powers launched the Gorlice-Tarnow offensive, shattering Russian lines. Ill-equipped Russian soldiers faced disaster, leading to the Great Retreat. Hundreds of miles lost, millions of casualties. Civilians fled, creating a massive refugee crisis. The Russian army neared collapse, exposing the Tsarist regime's incompetence. Tsar Nicholas II took personal command, tying his fate to the war's failures. The seeds of revolution were sown in the misery of 1915. The war expanded beyond Europe's trenches in 1915, reaching the seas and skies. Britain's naval blockade aimed to starve Germany, while German U-boats launched unrestricted submarine warfare. In May, a U-boat sank the RMS Lusitania, killing nearly 1,200 including 128 Americans, sparking outrage and shifting U.S. opinion. In the air, planes evolved from scouts to deadly fighters. Roland Garros's innovation let machine guns fire through propellers, turning planes into hunters. The Germans improved the design, creating the Fokker Eindecker and unleashing the Fokker Scourge. German aces dominated the skies, and air combat became a deadly new front. The race for technological superiority intensified. Civilians and soldiers alike were now targets. The war's reach was truly global. No place was safe from its impact. For soldiers, 1915 was about survival in the trenches, not grand strategy. Trenches became vast, permanent networks. Miserable, rat-infested and deadly. Boredom alternated with terror. Death was always near. Shell shock and trench foot plagued the men, while mud and filth became constant enemies. Letters and poetry tried to capture the horror. Wilfred Owen's words would later expose the war's brutal truth. Soldiers coped with dark humor and deep camaraderie, forging bonds in adversity. The stench of death and decay was ever present. Amidst misery, the only solace was the brotherhood of survival. The war's true cost was measured in shattered bodies and minds. 1915's suffering would haunt a generation. 1915 ended as it began, with stalemate and slaughter. The war's monstrous reality was now clear. No quick victory, only grinding attrition. Gallipoli and Ypres proved old tactics were obsolete. New horrors like gas and U-boats redefined the battlefield. The line between soldier and civilian blurred as the war became total. The lessons of 1915 set the stage for even greater bloodshed at the Somme and Verdun. The Great War lost its last shred of glory, becoming a grim, industrialized struggle. The world was changed forever. The path to total war was set, and there was no turning back.
By early 1917, the conflict in Europe had reached a critical juncture. The Great War had dragged on for nearly 3 years, an agonizingly long time, shattering any illusions of a quick victory for any of the nations involved. Across the Western Front, millions of soldiers endured endless trench warfare. A brutal, grinding existence, mud, barbed wire, and constant danger, a daily reality. The stalemate was total. Neither side could gain a decisive advantage. Offensives brought only massive casualties, and little ground gained, a horrific exchange of life for inches. On the home front, exhaustion and food shortages were rampant, impacting civilian populations severely, especially in Germany, where the British blockade caused the infamous turnip winter, a time of great suffering. Morale plummeted. In France, mutinies erupted as soldiers refused to fight in futile assaults, a sign of crumbling resolve. Governments responded with propaganda and harsh measures to keep their nations fighting, attempting to maintain control. The war had become a brutal test of national will and industrial strength, a contest of resources and endurance. Generals struggled to break the deadlock, desperately seeking a way to achieve victory, trying everything from massive bombardments to poison gas, but nothing worked. Battles like the Somme and Verdun cost over 1 million lives, yet the front barely moved, a testament to the futility of the fighting. A sense of futility and exhaustion gripped both sides, a shared feeling of hopelessness. The conflict was now a war of attrition, a grinding down of resources and manpower, draining entire societies. Leaders knew that whichever side broke first would lose, making the stakes incredibly high. The old strategies were dead. They had proven ineffective in the face of modern warfare. New ideas were desperately needed, a spark to reignite hope for a resolution. The world waited, wondering how much longer the slaughter could continue and what the ultimate cost would be. Only a dramatic, unforeseen event could change the course of this stalemate, offering a glimmer of hope. The stage was set for a turning point. For 3 years, the United States stayed neutral, but neutrality was slipping. Economic ties to the Allies and Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare pushed America closer to war. The resumption of U-boat attacks and the shocking Zimmerman telegram, offering Mexico U.S. territory in exchange for joining Germany, outraged Americans. On April 6, 1917, the U.S. declared war on Germany. President Wilson called it a crusade to make the world safe for democracy. America's army was small, but its resources and manpower promised a decisive shift. The Allies gained hope. Germany faced a new, powerful enemy. The clock was ticking for the Central Powers. The entry of the US would tip the balance, but if the Allies could hold out long enough, the war's outcome was no longer certain. As America entered the war with a surge of manpower and resources, Russia, on the other hand, was collapsing under the weight of immense pressure. The war had utterly devastated Russia. Millions dead, a staggering loss of life, the army in complete chaos, morale shattered, and the people were starving, desperate for relief. In March 1917, revolution erupted like a volcano. The Tsar abdicated his throne, and a provisional government, weak and unstable, took over. But the new leaders disastrously chose to keep fighting the war, a fatal error. Soldiers deserted in droves, the front lines disintegrated completely, and utter chaos reigned supreme. The Bolsheviks, a radical faction led by Lenin, seized power in November in a coup with fervent promises of peace to the war-weary populace, land redistribution, and crucially bread for all. Their very first act was to seek peace at any cost with Germany. In March of 1918, Russia signed the incredibly harsh Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, losing vast swathes of territory. For Germany, this was an enormous strategic windfall. There would be no more war on two fronts to worry about. Veteran German troops were now rushed west with great haste in preparation for a final decisive offensive. But Russia's exit also unleashed a bloody revolution and a brutal civil war at home. The Eastern Front was now closed for good, but the ultimate fate of the war would now be decided solely in the West. The stage was now set for what would be Germany's last desperate gamble. With Russia out, German General Ludendorff launched the Kaiserschlacht, one last massive offensive in the West. In March 1918, a thunderous artillery barrage shattered the British lines. Elite stormtroopers infiltrated deep, breaking the trench deadlock for the first time in years. German forces advanced up to 40 miles, causing panic among the Allies. But success brought problems. Supply lines broke down and exhausted troops looted captured depots. Momentum stalled as the Germans ran out of food, ammunition, and fresh men. Ludendorff tried more attacks, but each followed the same pattern: initial gains, then grinding to a halt. Allied defenses, coordinated by Marshal Foch, held firm. By July, the offensive had failed. The German army was spent, casualties irreplaceable. The last great gamble had failed. The Allies, battered but unbroken, prepared to strike back. The tide of war was turning. Germany's window of opportunity had closed. The war's final years saw rapid innovation, a testament to the urgent need for new solutions. Tanks and planes fundamentally transformed the battlefield landscape. Early tanks were often unreliable, prone to breakdowns and mechanical failures, but by 1918, British and French models could effectively cross trenches and crush enemy defenses. Aircraft evolved from simple scouts to formidable fighters and strategic bombers, adding a completely new dimension to combat and warfare. Legendary aces like the Red Baron became national icons, but air power was now about more than individual dogfights and daring maneuvers. The Germans pioneered innovative stormtrooper tactics, small, fast units specifically designed for exploiting weak points in the enemy lines. The Allies learned quickly from these advancements, developing combined arms warfare, infantry, artillery, tanks and planes working in close coordination together. The creeping barrage allowed troops to advance safely behind a moving wall of artillery shells. Old tactics were now obsolete and ineffective. Success now depended heavily on seamless coordination and advanced technology. Artillery became significantly more accurate, precisely targeting enemy guns using new techniques. These crucial innovations finally broke the long and bloody trench stalemate. The Allies were at last ready to launch a devastating new kind of offensive. The era of modern, technologically driven warfare had definitively arrived. The overall balance of power on the battlefield was undeniably shifting. After the failed German offensive, the Allies seized the initiative. Fresh American troops flooded into France, boosting Allied strength. Marshal Foch launched the 100 Days Offensive, a relentless series of attacks across the front. It began at Amiens in August 1918. Tanks, planes, and infantry smashed through German lines. German defenses collapsed, thousands surrendered, and morale broke. The Allies kept up the pressure, never allowing the Germans to regroup. The Hindenburg Line, once thought impregnable, was breached. By October, the German army was in full retreat. The offensive was a masterpiece of modern tactics and coordination. Germany's allies fell away seeking peace. The end was inevitable. The Allies had finally broken the back of the German war machine. Victory was in sight. By November 1918, the Central Powers were collapsing. Bulgaria surrendered, the Ottoman Empire surrendered, Austria-Hungary surrendered. Germany stood alone. Starvation, defeat, and revolution swept Germany. The Kaiser abdicated, a new republic was declared. German delegates met the Allies in a railway carriage at Compiègne. The terms were harsh: total withdrawal, surrender of weapons, and no negotiation. On November 11th at 11 a.m., the armistice took effect. The guns finally fell silent after 4 years of slaughter. Soldiers emerged from trenches, stunned by the sudden peace. The world rejoiced, but the cost was staggering. The war was over, but its shadow would linger for generations.